So the process first is to establish whether what those people are doing is against the Quran and the Sunnah. So it may be that there is something that we might think is not unconventional, when in fact it isn't. So go on, you give me the example.
So one of the examples is participating in a zikr session, like a wazifa session, and they would have like a white cloth maybe in the middle, and they would have some like companions and the robe of the person is present, and the people there, they will be.
What's the white cloth for?
That their robe is present, like their.
Ah. Okay.
I don't know the translation.
Yeah, the soul is present. Go on, and
these people, they have seen.
Yeah. Okay. Easy. That's a very, very easy explanation to this, right? So first and foremost, it might appear weird to people who aren't used to something like that, and it isn't necessarily clearly in conformity to the Quran and Sunnah, right? But that practice they're not committing sin. They're not necessarily committing a sin, and that practice isn't particularly bad. The only really problematic thing that I can see here, theologically speaking, is this idea that the Prophet is present. Do you understand? And sometimes people have a chair present for him and so on. That theologically, that's questionable in that we have nothing to base something like that on. Does that make sense? However, it is a very, very widely held belief among certain groups. Okay, that the Prophet ﷺ comes to gatherings of remembrance, particularly gatherings held in his name, Mawlid gatherings, right? That the Prophet's spirit is present in these gatherings. Now, it's a massive issue of controversy among the Muslims across the world. Not just, it's a big issue in the Indian subcontinent, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. There is this issue. So in Bangladesh, villages are torn and split. Families are split over this whole issue of, can we celebrate the Prophet's birthday or not? And if you go a little bit further, does the Prophet come to the Mawlid or not? You understand? In Pakistan, there are Mawlid gatherings where a chair is decorated for the Prophet's presence. Right? So these things happen. Now, it's very difficult from a juristic point of view or from a theological point of view to justify this. Okay? So let's just say that somebody is doing this, somebody is engaged in that. Okay? And they see the Prophet ﷺ. Well, let's for a second compare that person to an alternative person who doesn't commit any kind of bid'ah. Right? Is it possible that both of these people are engaged in sin? Is it possible? Who doesn't commit sins? Who's without sin? Nobody's without sin, right? Everybody commits sin. Do we ever assume that anybody who sees the Prophet ﷺ in a dream is necessarily sinless? No. So people can be very sinful, right? But something about them is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they might genuinely see the Prophet ﷺ in a dream. My point, you get my point? My point is, just because you engage in one thing that might be incorrect according to Sharia, does not mean that you are not still a really, really good person in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That your overall situation, your commitment to worship, your commitment to spirituality, your hours and hours of reciting the Quran and dhikr of Quran and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and making dua in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and crying at night and doing tahajjud and things like that, are not things that are beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That far outweigh the error that you've made about a particular issue. You understand my point? My point is that it's possible for a practice that we engage in to be wrong. We insist on engaging in that wrong, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still loves us. That we're still rewarded spiritually for the good that we do. Make sense? Which should also explain another issue. That sometimes when people attribute incorrect practices to other Muslims, so they say, oh, these people, they engage in bid'ah. Do you understand? Right? They also make a mistake of measuring that person's closeness to Allah according to that mistake. So because this person engages in this bid'ah, right, these people are deviant, etc., etc. The assumption, the dots that are connected are, and because they are deviant, they are therefore people who are distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So people engage in cursing, engage in offending behavior and so on and so forth, and then suffer in their own lives, not realizing that they're suffering in their own lives because they have hurt the feelings of those people. Because a person misinterprets an aspect of Sharia and does something that is wrong or bid'ah, right? But doesn't commit any sins, does no haram, doesn't consume alcohol, doesn't commit zina, doesn't deal in interest, right? Is really worried about committing sin, is firm on prayer, firm on dhikr, etc., etc. But they have some erroneous practices. Another person, right, thinks the sun shines out of himself, right? Is well read, understands everything, thinks he owns the whole conversation about what is bid'ah and what isn't. Just about does his fara'id. Engages in backbiting other people. Backbites other people because of religion. Right? Backbites other people because he looks down on their religiosity. These people, they're mubtadi'ah. They're this, that, and the other. Who's more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One person is committing blatant kaba'ir, because no justification, blatant kaba'ir, right? Even though in their own subjective mind they are more superior and more religious than this elderly woman or this other person who maybe commits some bid'ah out of ignorance, right? That how one person subjectively looks upon another person has nothing to do with what that person's position is in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.